All right, so let's get on our first presentation for long-term recovery. Bruce Yerman is going to speak to us about the long-term recovery group and all that entails. Thank you, Bruce.
She's volunteering to help do the slides. My mind turns off every time I get behind a podium. And so it's pretty amazing how that happens consistently. Wow, Friday afternoon, and you're still here. Woo, yeah. But one thing about disasters is there's rarely a clock, unless it's to hurry. So when I came in today, Kevin suggested I take my name's Bruce Yerman. I'm the director of the Campfire Collaborative. Kevin suggested I take a few moments and some time to remember the campfire, which happened on this day 6 years ago. And I've been thinking about that this entire time since you asked me to do that. And I've gone back and forth of a few ways to do that. Some of them are pretty dramatic stories, and I thought, although they're pretty dramatic, I don't really want to go there. Others are ironic and somewhat humorous, which are fun, but it just feels a little awkward sharing those stories in a memorial. So when I spoke on Wednesday, I did not share this list that I'm going to share with you right now. And I thought a great way to do something that's value added to you is to share with you what it is like in a long-term recovery group on the week of the 6th anniversary. And most of it is the regular work. And so I've highlighted something from each day, but it's also symbolic into something in the bigger picture. And there are people in this room that have worked with the Campfire Collaborative. There are people in this room that have been case managers with the Campfire Collaborative. There are people in this room that have been sat in the Unmet Needs Roundtable representing their groups as funders in the Campfire Collaborative. And we have at least one, if not more, that's been a committee chair in the Campfire Collaborative. And the only reason we exist is because of you and partners. When I first came on board, I worked with FEMA for a year before coming to the Campfire Collaborative. I was worried that everybody was going to go because we're nothing when people go. We're only something when we're there as a community. And I think by the end of this presentation, some of what I share is going to even make more sense. And I'll try to go through it as quickly as I can out of respect to you. But so everything here's got a symbolic purpose. And one of them is, as I wrote this down, what happened every day, I want you to know that kind of recently I decided with my board to move from 5 days a week to 4 days a week to try to stretch out the budget as long as we can. And I have 7 days a week of work I'm looking at. So, which is what happens, right? All right. So on Monday this week, I was asked to interview with NPR. And some of you mentioned to me today that you heard that interview today. I've not heard it yet, and that it came off okay. And I'm really glad for that. But symbolically, I want you to know that a few weeks ago, I looked up on Google Scholar, and there have been over 200 research projects on the Campfire Burn Scar area. And 1 week ago Sunday, the Campfire Collaborative helped host 2 of those universities working together on a project who came back to Paradise to present their findings that they hope will lead into policy on resilience and recovery. They're the only group that I know of out of the 200 that have come back. On Tuesday, the highlight of that day was what we call creative collaboration. Now, 6 years ago, less than 6 years ago, and some of you think Bobby may have been part of this, if not others, were part of it when there were 8,000 people on the waiting list for case management. And and Matt, you were part of this, through burner phones or whatever, you got that number down to about 1,600 families. Currently, hot off the press, we have this year, from January through October, 216 new cases, families. And DCMs have closed 99 of those cases. And I know of other new cases that have come forward just this week. This is 6 years into a disaster. On Wednesday, I went to Sacramento and met with this group there, and that was wonderful. But at the same time, through my associate, she facilitated what we call the Simple Unmet Needs Roundtable. And at that roundtable, that's a weekly roundtable, which will make more sense a little bit later, disaster case managers present cases that are relatively quick and easier to fund. 2 weeks ago, 3 of those cases were park fire survivors who had also lost their home in the campfire. And so what we're doing at the campfire is we're taking those groups and working on funding those, which it's a lot harder to get money for the park fire, so there's a little bit more over there. The creative collaboration, I don't think I explained that one very well. That's where, on Tuesday, that's where I meet with disaster case managers, and this had all kinds of iterations since that 1,600 cases. There used to be 10 case management agencies. Now we're down to Northern Valley Catholic Social Services and Suu Kyi, which is fine, because they handle them all very well. But those cases are hard, and they're getting harder. And so creative collaborations where we can sit and put our heads together and maybe grease the wheels with certain organizations or come up with some ideas so that we can get those through. And then Wednesday, while I was in Sacramento, we had the Sun meeting. Thursday, yesterday, was our complex unmet needs roundtable. We do this once a month. And there was one case presented. And this was, I believe it was for In the Town of Paradise. Personal identifiable information is kind of wiped clean from these. I don't know mostly who these people are, and neither do the funders. It could have been in Magalia, but I think it was in Paradise. It was a senior gentleman who took all of his fire victims' trust money and used it well and purchased land. He knows how to build. He's building a house. The trust money is coming in way less and expenses are way more, and he can't finish it. And he's elderly, and he has no way of getting the income. And so the case managers presented a case for $50,000, and there were 6 funders sitting at this round table 6 years in, and we were able to fund his case for $50,000. Wow. That was yesterday. Awesome. Today I'm here. I got up this morning, I exercised, and the first thing I did was get online and do the social media that you're required to do if you want to keep somewhat engaged with the community, trying to find some sort of happy, positive, hopeful message on a rather solemn day. And then, before I came here, I sent the agenda to Housing and Community Development in Sacramento. A couple of years ago, we met with them the first time. They've got a program that's helping build homes in the town of Paradise, and I think the county. And they have their own case managers, and it was just not working. And they were actually re-traumatizing many of the survivors just through the process of going through it. And so we met with them in Chico, and it was a nice meeting, and things seemed really good. I mean, these are some powerful folk, and nothing changed. And so then about 5 months later, just frustrations on our end, we're just through with the disaster case managers we work with and the survivors they work with, and watching people not progressing maybe over here because they're waiting for HCD over here. We then called James Gallagher and his office and said, we want to meet in Daddy's office. And they met with us there, and it was a conflictive, hard meeting. But the results have been fantastic. I wish they could change their policies, but they did change their ways, and they did change their mannerisms. And my former colleague, Kate Scousmith, even did a in-service with them on disaster or on trauma-informed recovery and counseling. And we're now meeting with them once a month. It used to be once every 2 weeks. So I sent the agenda for next week's meeting with them. That was today. Tomorrow is the Phoenix 5K, put on by Paradise Stronger as the anniversary. There are over 300 people signed up for that event. And last year I ran an 8.5-minute mile for 3 miles, and this year I'm not ready. Yeah. There's also a memorial ribbon cutting sponsored by Rebuild Paradise, where they got hundreds of children's hands, put them in ceramics and painted them, and they're creating a memorial to the campfire, and it's all up. It's on the Memorial Trail in Paradise. That's at 11 o'clock. Then Sunday, I go to Oroville to the Trinity Presbyterian church, where they house volunteers for both the campfire, maybe the bear fire, and anybody coming to help. Because Presbyterian Disaster Assistance is bringing their second group of volunteers to the Campfire Burn Scar area. And Reverend Jeannie Shaw contacted us a month ago. And then I just simply sent out an email, and they're going to be helping with the Tiny Pine Foundation, building a home in Concow, and they're helping with a 501c3 from the Ground Up Farms with their tool library project. And they're going to be there for 3 days, and then I get to eat with them. That's my contribution. So that's how I wanted to celebrate 6 years and let this group know what a long-term recovery group is doing 6 years later. So thank you for that time. Now let me jump into this. This is a theme that I have throughout this presentation, but this is a simulation game that we're not going to play, but I want to tell you about it because we're going to end on the same theme here. And talking to Aaron briefly, I believe this would align with his principles as well. This simulation game works really well, especially with younger people, younger like teenagers and young adults. But you give them these broken squares, and you tell them, put your square together as fast as you can. And they can be sitting there for 5 minutes, stealing everybody's pieces, trying to put together their square. But as they're stealing somebody's piece that they need, somebody else is stealing the piece that they need from them. And they never can put together the squares. If you change the instructions slightly and say, put all of your squares together as fast as you can and look for what the other person needs and don't take but give, they can do it in less than a minute as they look across the table and push the pieces to where they think they need to go. And that's what happens in a successful community and a successful long-term recovery group. And I wish to express gratitude to all of you for doing that, and even being here on a Friday afternoon if you don't want to, because you're actually giving something that somebody else may need by just being here. And you do that as we work together in community, and that's going to become more evident through these next few slides. But I do want to start with some specific gratitudes of organizations that I've seen firsthand that do it. And I could put all of your organizations up here, but I chose these because they're partly the host of this conference. If Kevin stands up here, you can guess which one he is and faces the wall. This is Kevin and his brother Mark receiving from the town of Paradise a proclamation and gratitude for the work that they have done in the burn scar area. And that's the mayor in the middle there reading that proclamation. HCRN has been fantastic, and that was one of the groups early on before I really knew Kevin. It's like, why are you still here? We're not even nice, you know? We don't even know what we're doing. And I think he knew enough, he had enough perspective that he could see beyond that. And now we're friends. We're good friends. The next one I should have is of Salvation Army. I don't have a slide for them, but we met there last week and on Wednesday. Thank you for that. This next site is where the first meeting was on Monday that I did not attend. Not the exact location, but I want to thank and recognize Tzu Chi Foundation, which again, in their mission or their vision is compassion. And there isn't an organization that lives and breathes that any better than Tzu Chi whenever they show up consistently. I had a survivor friend in the town of Paradise. I told him what I was doing. He said, "Oh yeah, I remember that Tai Chi Foundation." And I tease Minjin about that. Yeah, you're the Tai Chi Foundation. This next happy trio here is the disaster case managers from Northern Valley Catholic Social Services. And really want to thank them. Two of those ladies were there for the Complex Unmet Needs Roundtable on Thursday, which we hold on Zoom, and they were Zooming in from Tennessee. And the reason they're Zooming in from Tennessee is because Tennessee has brought out what I call the PhD people of Northern California, PhD in experience, to be able to share there and shortcut some of the things that have to happen after Hurricane Helene. This happens, and this is a real example of reaching out. I don't know whether these ladies were paid for this as time or not, but it doesn't really matter. Paradise Park and Rec District had a small grant. They applied for it. Then they put on a family game night in the evening at Paradise Park and Rec District. And I attended and watched them pass out bicycles and play games and have pizza and food. It was a lot of fun. All right, next one. You all know where Butte County is. We're not gonna stay there very long. You all know about the campfire, and so we're not gonna revisit that data. But there is a piece of data that I looked up in comparison before coming here. 18,804 destroyed buildings in the homes of Paradise and Magalia, Concow, and Butte Creek. 2 months later, beginning in January 2019, right through the park fire in 2024, there are 20,401 structures burned. Those two numbers are very, very similar. But over those years, that's over 40,000 structures destroyed. Next slide. This was a slide, this was a graphic in the New York Times in August. These are Northern California counties, and this is what has burned in the past few years. If you take all those and mash them into one tight map, over half of those counties have burned. And most of those counties, or many of those fires have a long-term recovery group of some size. This was, that next slide is a slide we put together for a presentation we made at the National VOAD, but it applies to all of those counties. This is, to a degree, this is what Butte County looked like before the Camp Fire. And you're going to recognize virtually every line there, except I'm very happy to say now that we do have VOADs working and doing some great things in these counties. And I wish to thank the people who are involved in those things for doing that. But low economic growth, a lot of retired people, food insecurity, aging populations, affordable housing was already hard to find, multiple disasters, a declining construction workforce, and then you compound those by the disasters, and then you throw in all of our organizations trying to help recovery on top of all of those. And so when somebody comes in traumatized, or you're working with a family trying to recover, you end up dealing with all of these things, and I would say case managers do on a daily basis. So the last few slides that I have here, what I've done is I've actually gone to the long-term recovery guidebook and wrote down something. This guidebook is several dozen pages long, so I'm just barely doing it any justice. But I want you to, it's a fantastic document for a long-term recovery group. This organization where it says Campfire Long-Term Recovery Group was just taken from the VOAD organization with that centerpiece and those committees going around it. It says the purpose of a long-term recovery group is to have a designated, centralized, coordinating group of partnering organization whose common goal is to assist the impacted individuals and families in the community with their long-term recovery. Long-term recovery groups encourage community participation and pooling together of resources to get the most out of a recovery effort. So in August, I was flown out to, it's called the Desert Research Institute. I didn't know what they were, but it's like the third arm of higher education in the state of Nevada. And ironically, they're the big researchers in the Antarctic, of all things. They're really into weather. But they're now moving into fire science. And apparently 2017 and 2018 were the big changes in fire science, and they're just catching up to it. And so I'm sitting there on this panel with an anthropologist from the National Forest Service. I didn't know they did that. I'm sitting up there with a water resource specialist from Reno. Their water comes from California. Imagine the complications there, and fire. And then a PhD researcher in Colorado. And we're talking to a really wonky group who are all scientists out there from across the country. But then I showed them this next slide, which is going to look super familiar. And between this next slide and a couple of other things, every presenter for the next 2 days referred back to the Campfire Long-Term Recovery Group or the Campfire Collaborative. Because it was just like, in their minds, you know, you're not a prophet in your own country, right? But you go out of your country, like, bing, they've never seen this stuff before. Okay, this is that slide. Really, it looks a whole lot like the other one I showed you. But the difference is these logos around it. And this is where I think the strength of the Campfire Collaborative is. Each logo represents a committee chair. And just this afternoon, the 3 committee chairs for the Housing Committee, the Valley Contractors Exchange, Amy, Habitat for Humanity, Nicole, and Community Housing Improvement Program, Shauna, are emailing back and forth, organizing the county, the city, and others to present just brief reports at next week's Housing Committee meeting, which is now only once a quarter. But the reason that group keeps going is it's value added to the attendees. It's value added because they come and they get something out of it, because it's the only place in the community where that group is going to meet together. That may include bankers, it may include realtors, it includes for-profit contractors and volunteers. It's the only place. And it only happens at a long-term recovery group. 3 weeks ago, the Spiritual and Emotional Wellness Committee went up to Concow. Concow's a bit of a challenge. It's a little out of the way. And we met at Tony's restaurant, a hamburger place. And the message was, we want to be here because if you were in paradise, you have a problem, we just talk. We figure it out together. We're better together than apart. And it just so happens that what they wanted to talk about has nothing to do directly with the campfire, but it kind of does with the new changes in law regarding homelessness. A lot of the people that are being pushed out of places like Chico are showing up in Concow and lighting fires to stay warm at night. And Suu Kyi and North Valley Community Foundation funded a warehouse right there at Tony's, and then the group in Butte County that's supposed to supply the food backed out last minute. And they want to provide warm food every day, right? And some services. Anyway, so we go back and we make a couple of phone calls, not because we got the power. It's just like, hey, I just had this meeting, and people are like, oh, well, I think we can help. I mean, the same people that are already involved, but that's kind of what the long-term recovery group ends up doing without even planning. A long-term recovery group is a cooperative body that's made up of representatives from faith-based, nonprofit, government, business, and other organizations working within a community to assist individuals and families as they recover from a disaster. It can take time to pull these organizations together. Patience and trust are essential to LTRG formation. Man, who here's got patience and trust down pat? Those are tough. And I am really glad for the patience, for example, Kevin, that you and your organization have demonstrated, and many others with the rest of us. Not every organization can do that. There are some people, some organizations that should be there that are doing good things that I've approached, but they don't have patience with the idea of getting together and working through a mess. And they're still doing good things, but we would be better with them, and they would be better with us. Okay. Now we open up each one of those committees and look at all the logos in there. Now, not all of these committees are meeting, and still, most of them are, and not all of those logos are present all the time. It depends on the anatomy of the disaster. But, the housing committee still has 30 logos attending. Spiritual and emotional wellness, it's about 5 logos that are still attending. And that is just great. And that's why this works. It becomes value added to them. It's helpful to identify agencies and organizations that commonly provide disaster services. These organizations are prospective partners for stakeholders may also include civic, social agencies, local houses of worship, community foundations, community health groups, mental health agencies, and it kind of goes on. And personnel from local and state emergency management. The more that are sitting at these tables, the better. And it's not that you're always going to get something from that table, but you don't know when you are, and you don't know when you're going to be able to give it. But when you're ready to give it, you're there. And that's what some agencies and some people just haven't fully comprehended. And it's not easy. I grant that. So this is a symbol I use. It looks very much like that same shape. Right? And this is a wagon wheel with a ton of spokes on it. Super strong wagon wheel. And each one of those spokes represents an agency, an organization, which could be you and your organization. Each organization is pointed in slightly a different direction. Each direction has a slightly different vision, different mission, and that's good because it actually strengthens the whole wheel. And where they come together in the center is the long-term recovery group. And that's where case managers can come to access each one of those different missions and visions that are cooperating together in a slightly different way to help the individual families. Monitoring your program and evaluating progress regularly will ensure an ongoing success. It's important to set a schedule for generating and reviewing program reports. In addition to confirming that progress is being made, this will help encourage and support from donors and continued community involvement. I think my job as a director, and I wish I was perfect at it, but it is always in my heart and in my head, is to be sure things are value added for every agency participating. The long-term recovery group, it's often said, is there to help the individual recover, but it's really to help the agencies meet their mission and vision so that individuals can recover. Next one, ahead of me. Thank you. So I took a picture of 3 files here. The first file is only about 1/4 of an inch thick. The next one's about 1 inch thick, and the last one's about 2 inches thick. And starting at the bottom, there's no file. At the very beginning of the campfire, and there may have been more agencies involved. Matt was there, I was not. Butte Strong and American Red Cross donated funds for about 1,300 cases, emergency funds. This eventually evolved into what was the CFC's Unmet Needs Roundtable. And eventually, through these roundtables, we've been able to help people with $16.5 million worth of aid. Not all of that money comes through the Campfire Collaborative, but a lot does. And that does not include all of the agencies' funding. I just learned through our donations, we have 3 donations warehouses that act as co-chairs for the donations committee. One of those warehouses has given out over 12 million worth of goods. And those are one of 3, and there are more that don't participate with us. The other thing is that when case managers, so we've helped approximately, I think it was, I'd have to add those together, it's about 2,000 cases, right? We've helped over 2,000 families through the Unmet Needs Roundtable, but 90% of the cases never come to the roundtable. Case managers take them directly to the agencies. And that's the other reason for being. You may not have the money, but if you can have the community's got resources. There's a lot of other resources besides money. But simple unmet needs, which I talked about earlier, we have helped with 950 cases. We don't handle any of that money, straight from funders to cases. There was a manufactured home program, just read today, that we just finalized the last manufactured home with a certificate of occupancy. And that was at about $5 million. And the Campfire Collaborative ran everything with that. But we never touched the money, went to another fiscal agent, and we just said, pay this, pay that, send this, do that. But each one of the pieces of paper in that green file represents a touch point or a legal document or a deed of trust that we had to manage. And the last one, the complex one, like the one I talked about yesterday, this is June's number. At that time, we were at 85. I think we're at 97 now. Each one of those pieces of paper represents a touch point, and most of those are invoices. As the work is being done, the case managers send us invoices. We hold on. In this one, the funders send us the money. We put it in the name of this case, and then we track it. And we do the accounting for it. So the guide says, identifying the unmet needs of your community, developing a budget, setting up an administrative structure, and figuring out where necessary resources will come from are all foundational steps for sustaining the work of long-term recovery. The heart of the day-to-day program comes in managing cases, allocating resources, and delivering services, and that's basically what I do. The next slide is creative collaboration. We already talked about that, so let's go on to the other one. This is a picture of our ribbon cutting when we moved from Chico to Paradise. And this topic is important to long-term recovery groups. And this is, if Cal OES, if you could figure this one out, or if the National VOAD could figure this one out, it's often said that a disaster, and I hear this from the federal and state partners, disaster starts locally and ends locally. And what that means is the disaster happens, all these people come in, all these people leave, and your local groups are left with whatever's remaining. And a lot of good happens in between there. But in the case of the campfire, and I would say even the park and the Thompson and the others, it's going to be a decade or more for some of those families to recover. And to walk away and say, it's now up to you guys locally, you figure it out. Yet it's impossible, especially in these rural communities. You know, it may be better in large populous areas. I imagine it's still a challenge. This comes from the manual. Critical to long-term recovery are the people who oversee the day-to-day operations of the recovery program and guide the process. This group may consist of paid staff or volunteers from partner agencies, and thank you partner agencies who use some of your resources and time to pay your staff, and the community. The structure of your LTRG will inform the makeup of your administrative staff between paid and volunteer. And it does require facilities, office phones, copiers, file cabinets, places for people to sit, PG&E bills to pay, things like that. Many groups struggle because they neglect these factors. I mean, you got to have the foundation if you're going to be able to do the work. Thinking they can run a long-term recovery effort on a limited budget. You can't. So, big government policy, whatever, when you walk away and say it ends with you locally, are you walking away from a group that can continue that effort, or does your walking away leave that group without the ability to continue that effort without your help? Even this part in white is just a photograph of what comes from that manual. Administration doesn't have to be expensive. The other side of that coin is, but it does need to be paid, right? But it needs to be present for a program to be successful. You got to have somebody paying attention to this every day. Next slide. We're dealing a lot with this in Northern California, rural and low attention disasters. I understand where we are from the Campfire Collaborative. It was just so big, it's almost like a celebrity disaster. But it's also so big that whatever every other fire is dealing with, we still are dealing with too. People who cannot recover, people who have not come forth, not enough funding or money to help them, challenging situations. And we have the numbers that are still big in all of those areas. Rural and low attention disasters, accessing the needed resources, particularly in a smaller rural communities affected by low attention disaster, which may not have adequate local resources or enough people to sustain a long-term recovery group on their own. In these circumstances, you may have to be creative. It's hard to be creative in that situation with the makeup and how it operates. But one of the ways to be creative is this next slide. This also comes from the guide. If a long-term recovery group has not been established for a disaster, an unmet needs group can be stood up on its own, or an existing collaborative group of helping organizations within a community may be utilized in a similar function. While it's highly recommended that this process take place within the context of a long-term recovery group, the important point is that disaster case management has a place to take the needs that are struggling to find resources for within a client's recovery plan. So, I watched a little bit the anatomy of the park fire, and there's organizations and agencies out there providing funding outside of the Tehama or Butte Glen long-term recovery groups or the Campfire Collaborative long-term recovery group that are out doing their own thing with funding. And unless there's a place that can pull those agencies in, you don't get the synergetic effect, right, of being able to track and not double, not help people twice and things like that. And there's a lot of effort going on with the park fire to help that happen, and kudos to those who are doing that. But if you can't put together a long-term recovery group, try to put together an unmet needs roundtable. So I thought of this before I presented to the the Desert Research Institute, and in trying to play with the idea of future funding, there's a lot of funding out there for resiliency. I don't know what resiliency means. I do know that it has different meanings for different groups. If I'm the Fire Safe Council, resiliency may mean mitigation around the home. If I'm an emergency services group, resiliency may mean getting the word out to help people with go bags, evacuation plans, contact points. If I'm a workforce planning group, resiliency may mean retraining or being able to find another job quickly. If I'm in social work, resiliency may mean the ability to weather this, emotionally and spiritually. So I want to propose a definition for resiliency that may cover some of those things, but covers this group. Resilience is the collective strength of a community working together, where each member contributes unique talents, shares knowledge, pools resources, and builds trust. It's the ability to meet current needs while staying prepared for future challenges, even those that are unforeseen and unpredictable. I have no doubt that because of our relationship and what we've learned through the trials of the past few years, that whatever disaster happened next, we're going to be better prepared for it. We've got some of that resiliency. What if it's an earthquake, and a big one? Something that is just a little bit unforeseen. I have no doubt that we're going to be better prepared because of what we've been through together. But it takes that idea of looking and seeing what others need and doing that before the disaster ever happens. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Oh, this was fake wood. I'm knocking out all the wood because he said earthquake, and that freaked me out a little bit. All right, so I'd like to introduce our next presenter, James Coble, who is with Catholic Charities of California, and he's going to talk about, I'm going to define it and then say it, and then we won't pay his fines anymore. The Disaster Case Management Program, DCMP.
Would you? Thank you. Gosh, you guys actually look wide awake. How did you do that? It's been a long day. 3 conferences in 5 days. This executive planning committee, can we give them a round of applause? They're rock stars. So I want to discuss how long-term recovery groups and VOADs interact with case managers. Case managers vet each one of these survivors when they present their case to you. They do that through various ways. One of the things that they do, and Bruce kind of talked about that, is ensuring that there's no duplication of services. Because if FEMA does find out that there are duplication of services, they will come for the money that they gave you. So it's very important that we have one point of contact, and I think that's the whole idea of this VOAD long-term recovery group. Case managers rank each one of our survivors that become on the caseload. So there's a criteria of minimum of 25 different data points that we look at, and it's based on numerical values. Whoever has the highest points are the most needy, and those are the cases that are presented into an unmet needs roundtable. They prepare cases once they do that, and everything is anonymous. So they'll either use the FEMA number. If they didn't apply for FEMA, then they'll use their local number that's assigned to them. So in small rural communities, everybody knows each other, so we try to ensure confidentiality with that. So that's kind of how we present it. So let me talk a little bit about case management from the FEMA perspective. And I'm sure it was covered earlier today, but repetition is very good. So how this is all funded is through the Safford Act. So the president has the ability to declare a disaster and then fund that disaster. There are 2 types of awards. And I'm so glad they talked about the acronyms already, because I don't have enough money on me today. One's public assistance, PA, and that generally goes to counties for infrastructure, and the other is individual assistance. And I don't think it's what you think it is, actually. So if we can slip to the next slide. So individual assistance actually funds disaster teams. And what it entails is staff salaries, staff fringe benefits, office space, and supplies. So when you hear that FEMA has awarded a county X number of millions of dollars, it generally goes into the infrastructure to provide case management. Now, that doesn't mean that survivors don't get paid through FEMA, but it's direct. So when a disaster happens and it's declared, FEMA will do an assessment. And they use something called a FEMA Identification Data Analysis. We're going to call it FIDA from here on out. So this list gives us a bunch of information. It tells us how much they estimated the damage to be, what they paid out, if there's access and functional needs, what those might be, so that we can plan for that. It says individual assistance right there. And then we'll move on in just a second. I'm going to tap you every time. Okay, all right, we'll do that. So let's go to let's go to the next slide. So these are the positions that are approved by FEMA. You will have typically a program manager, case managers, and the number of case managers depends on the size of the disaster. We have a position called cost construction analyst. And I'll tell you, in our experience, having a licensed contractor has made a huge difference. Now, there'll never be a project manager out in the field, but what they will do is they will ensure that the project is progressing, that the payment schedule is legal. You know, something about disasters, it brings out the very best in human beings and it brings out the very worst. You know, before we came on board, they might have been awarded $50,000 and they paid $50,000 up front to a construction company and they never saw them again. So again, brings out the best and worst. We fund something called a resource coordinator, and they look and they vet different groups out in the counties, in local counties. We have a finance specialist, as you can imagine. We have to be very detailed with the federal government. And, you know, in fact, that the chain of the money starts with FEMA. Once it's declared, in the state of California, it goes to Cal OES. Cal OES has contracted or has an MOU with California Department of Social Services, who then looks for a management agency, and that's how Catholic Charities of California gets involved. They've contracted with us to oversee local programs, and then you have the actual programs in the specific counties. We finance an administrative secretary and an access functional needs specialist. And in that FIDA report that I was talking about, there's a whole column that lists all those needs, so we can go directly to that. And when I started with the 2020 wildfires in Fresno County, all we had was a name and an email address. So you can imagine how much time is saved by doing all this assessment through the federal government. And just kind of a note, what is paid out to our survivors, remember this is an initial assessment, is never accurate. And if I say lowball, I'm not exaggerating. A family that may have lost their entire roof may be paid $600. That was the initial assessment. And part of that is they'll say, oh, it was pre-existing damage. It wasn't brought on by this. But having that licensed contractor as a cost construction analyst helps us argue the point. In fact, just in Northern California, we go through FEMA appeals when we notice that there's a discrepancy in the amount of damage and the amount that's paid out has resulted from your NVCS and all the other ones, over $500,000 of additional individual funds that go directly to the survivor. In terms of referrals, we've made over $3 million quite easily on those referrals, and that's working with your organizations. So having a VOAD or a long-term recovery group is vital for their recovery process. Valerie, can you thank you. So what does a management agency do? So this is Catholic Charities California. We provide oversight and support of local programs. We've learned training is essential. You hear the term, we don't know what we don't know. Unfortunately, in your county, you know you're experts because of all the disasters, unfortunately, that you've gone through. But we're taking that knowledge and putting that into a curriculum where we can share that with new organizations. We provide monthly reports to both California Department of Social Services and FEMA. In fact, we meet weekly with Renee. We accompany CDSS and FEMA on their annual site visits. In fact, we visited NVCSS yesterday in Oroville. And we do the overall contracts for each of the local providers. And you know, I think I missed a slide here, actually. I'm going to go, you don't have to go back, but I'm going to go back to my second slide, and this is the awarded timeline. And that's slide 2 if you're following me here. And I think this is important to note. We know that disasters take more than 24 months for completion. So FEMA provides in declared counties up to 24 months. There's a provision that adds an additional 12 months if certain criteria are met. And we have yet to find closing something early. We know that that this is a 5-10 year project, as you can hear from Paradise. And this is another nuance that you may not be aware of. So from the date of the disaster, the federal government does not fund you the next day. Funding does not come to local programs for 4 to 6 months, and that's pretty quick compared to the 2020 fires. California Department of Social Services has really stepped it up. So Renee Jackson, who talked a little bit earlier, she was paramount in getting a $2 million emergency fund to start the programs where we can reimburse programs, well, as early as 3 months. And I wish it was 3 days, but 3 months. And you would be surprised, again, finding local providers, it has been a challenge for us. So the fact that you have it established here, we're very grateful for. And we as Catholic Charities California have learned a lot from all of you, whether you know it or not. So thank you for that very much. So let's talk about the local provider agencies. What does NVCSS and, 39 other providers do? They're doing assessments all the time. They're vetting, they're developing relationships within the community. They navigate the FEMA process, and if you've never had to fill out a FEMA application form, if you leave out one box, it goes into cyberspace. So it is not, our folks think that, oh my gosh, I don't get any help. They didn't get back to me. If they do their denial letters on their own, I believe it says denial, and I forget who said this, but it was so appropriate. It's not a denial letter. It's, we need a lot more information before we can award you. So we've sent 6, 7, 8, 10 appeal letters to get that award. So that part of that $500,000, it's just not, I'm going to rewrite it and it's magic and we do it. It really is a very complicated, lengthy, and frustrating process. We educate our survivors again, if they're rebuilding, what that process looks like, and we give them a realistic timeline. You know, Hope City and Habitat for Humanity, Mennonite disaster groups, what a blessing, you know, because most of the people that are on our FEMA FIDA list, they don't return to normal. They don't get back into a stick-built house. In fact, you know, unfortunately, we know there's a lady living in a tent, and winter is coming. So you can imagine trying to find those resources. I'm sure that we will, but the anxiety to get to that space and to do that quickly is always a challenge. Your case managers are going to be a liaison to local government. So every county has different building codes, and to go through that process, if you're a lay person and you're traumatized from the event itself, you know, it may take some people 2 years just to say, I'm ready to have a case manager. And by then, we're closing. So having all these various case management groups out there, vital for the continued success. Because once the FEMA FIDA dollars close up, we don't want to transition our caseload to space. We want to have a formal handoff where all the work that maybe they've done in that 24, 36-month period can continue, and we can continue to get them back to their normal. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Lessons learned. Fires are very different than floods, obviously, and you've dealt with both. So when FEMA does an assessment on a fire, you see a foundation normally. There's nothing left. With floods, it truly is a guessing game. When I went to Planada, they were 6 feet underwater. I went there 10 days after. I didn't even see a water line. I'm going, it looks great. You go inside the house and you see the mold, you see the electrical issues, you see the damaged furniture and all this other stuff. Unfortunately, FEMA doesn't go to every house. So again, we have to apply and let them know the damage, and kind of the process from that is FEMA will then either bring an inspector back or they'll do it via video. And in some cases, when we have a licensed contractor, they believe our licensed contractor and they go with that. So again, the recipe isn't the same ingredients all the time. It changes every day with every county, with every FEMA individual that we're working with. So that was a hard lesson to learn. I wish it was easier. We know that we have to give ongoing training to staff. There are issues that come up all the time, and we're learning and we're putting together curriculums for that. Renee mentioned earlier, we don't have providers in every area. So, part of her spiel this last week was trying to find more providers. Working with your local governments, key, especially in the permitting department. When you build those relationships, I'm going to refer back to Fresno. It generally takes 2 months to get a permit. If they were involved in the Creek Fire incident, it took 2 weeks for that turnaround. So they were prioritized. And the only difference is we had that relationship with our local government. Media. Disasters are forgotten in about 2 months, we're finding. I think the lay public thinks, we fixed them, they got their money, FEMA's here, or the county's here. But we know that's not the case. So if we build a media apparatus that can let the locals know that there's still a huge need, and it seems like especially here, your disasters are compiling, and unfortunately the park fire hasn't been declared, so we can't operate as a FEMA case management agency. We've learned to be flexible, right? So resilience and flexibilities are key. And if you can just go to the last slide here. We deal with the recovery side of this whole process. You all are primarily with the response. And we had a major road that was washed out, so we were able to provide food and medicine 400 pounds at a time, and I got a little taste of what that response looks like, and you guys are amazing. And just to see the relief on people's faces when you all arrive. So I'm finished with my presentation, and thank you for your time. Really appreciate you guys.
All right. Yeah. So am I hooked up? Yes, there we go. Sorry. I'd like to introduce the Reverend Mark Dibelka with the Episcopal Diocese of Northern California, and we are going to pass out your flyers for you.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, so we'll put you, I don't know if you...
I had drafted Sherry, who is just some random person that I met today. Sherry is actually one of my lieutenants that helps me run the Mission for Disaster Resilience. But before I get started, I would like to ask every single person in this room a favor. Does anybody here have an access or functional need that might impact their mobility? Okay, you folks are exempted. Everybody else, please stand up and push your chairs in for a second. Nope. All right, everybody look towards me. You ready? I'm gonna teach you something here. It's very important in the Episcopal Church, all right? But it will not conflict with any personal beliefs that you might have. Are you ready? Take one step to the right and bring your left foot. One more step and clap. Now, take the step to the left and drag your foot to the right. One more step, bring them together and clap. Now, take this hand and do 2 lassos. And take this hand and do 2 lassos. Now take this hand, put it on this hip. This hand, put it on this hip. Take your right leg, pick it up, turn 90 degrees and set it down, and do the same thing with your left leg. Now, if we had more room between the tables, we'd do it again. So imagine there was some music there. All right, I got some blood moving back through your legs. Have a seat.
I'm glad I have arthritis. I'm falling down.
I will give you some of my arthritis meds. So do I. Thank you, folks, for being a good sport on that. I am Mark Dibelka. I very rarely use the title Reverend. I am an Episcopal priest. That might be a little bit obvious by the way I'm dressed today. Let's see. What else is there good to know about me? I'm the Missioner for Disaster Resilience for the Episcopal Diocese of Northern California. It's a real fancy bunch of words that means I also cover 26 counties of the state. And essentially, I am the bishop's emergency manager for about 81,000 square miles. I handle everything from preparation through long-term recovery when it comes to disaster work. And what is it that allows me to say that I'm qualified even in the least for something along these lines? Former firefighter, both structural and wildland, former EMT, former hazmat operator, retired tactical police officer. Let's see. I think that's it on that list.
Married to an amazing wife.
I am married to an amazing wife who if anybody ever gets a chance to meet her, think of her like the Tasmanian devil because she's about this tall and never stops moving. In my past, you know, we like to show our T-shirts. You know, our resume is on our T-shirt. Let's see, New York City for 9/11, chemical release from Eastman Kodak, various wildfires, earthquakes, mass violence incidents. I've been there and done some stuff. I didn't always look like a bowling pin. All of this used to be up a little bit higher. All right, so I'm here to talk to you folks about emotional and spiritual wellness. And I'm going to tell you right now that if you ever find yourself... Oh, I see Matt.
You also wear another hat.
I wear a cowboy hat. What other hat am I missing? Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you know what? That's even on the bottom of my list. I am the chair of Siskiyou Modoc VOAD. So, I am... Let's see. Let's go. Let's see. I'm the chair of Siskiyou Modoc VOAD. I do have seats, and I supervise other seats on various county VOADs. I am with Valerie on the state. I am with Adriana on the state on various committees. I just picked up another spot with the state, and I am I do have a seat on National VOAD Long-Term Recovery Group Committee. So, and can you believe I get paid only 40 hours a week? pretty easy to figure that one. All right. For anybody who actually does come to, ever to hear me preach because you have nothing better to do on a Sunday morning, I never use a manuscript because I know that stuff down cold. However, today I'm going to use a manuscript just to keep me on target, keep us going forward here. So I need to start my remarks by letting all of you folks know that I am not educated or licensed as a pastoral counselor. It's actually very important to know this. But I do have basic trauma-informed training to recognize when greater or more specialized emotional or mental health care might be needed. On the other hand, my daughter is a licensed therapist who does not hold as tightly to faith. She doesn't believe in God, okay? As I do. But she does have a background and a knowledge of faith. So I share this with you so that you can see both sides of a coin in the same family here. And so this has led to many interesting discussions regarding the overlap of services between emotional care and spiritual care, and training, and why she and I are constantly stepping on each other's toes, although that might be more father-daughter relationship. Some of the things that you might see in both camps, there are very subtle differences between them. And I don't know if anybody has noticed, but we handed out a piece of paper. And if you just glance at it, both sides look exactly alike. But they're not. And if you're wondering what the QR code in the upper right-hand corner is, that's my digital business card. So you can follow up with me later if you've got some stuff that you'd like to talk about. One side of the paper has to do specifically with spiritual care. The other side has specifically to do with emotional care. And I did it that way on purpose. Because when we think about emotional care services, ECS, still got my dollar. Emotional care services, their primary focus is emotional needs. Identification, let me pull this up a little bit closer where I can focus on it. Identification and care of a larger health concern. Notice, I don't consider mental health to be something different from physical health. It is all health. Coping and stress management, crisis intervention, the teaching of coping skills, and identification of future risk. These are all health-related items when we're talking about emotional care services. But when we get over to spiritual care services, SCS, those are focused on spiritual deeds. Pastoral care. Finding the divine in situations that might be difficult or might be very joyous. Focuses on the meanings that are within events. Can address crisis of faith and can help with faith rituals. Keeping in mind that I am a Christian priest, and so therefore I'm not as well versed in other faith traditions. What I'm talking about are things like if somebody wishes to have communion. That's where your spiritual care person steps in. I really don't think it's appropriate for a clinical psychologist to say, and on the night and breaking the bread. Yeah. In the same way that I'm not going to look at somebody and say, so tell me about your mother. What you're seeing are two modalities, two practices that work very closely together, that have areas of overlap, one with the other, but also have their own areas of specific training and specific competencies. And so one of the things that I am very proud to say is that the amount of headbutting between the two has reduced tremendously, primarily due to education. Education allows us to know our lane and stay in it. And it's very important for the spiritual practitioner to recognize when things are actually an emotional issue, when things might be a health-related issue. And I look to the back of the room, and I've got two friends in the back. Ladies, just raise your hand and wave. All right, I have two friends in the back room. Every time I go to a local assistance center or to a peer-to-peer group, if I'm doing spiritual support, I'm looking for those two to be the other side of my coin. And if I discover somebody is actually in need of emotional care, emotional support, peer support, I say, hey, would you like to meet my friends? So we work as a team in this case. And that's going to be very important looking forward in anything that we might do in emotional and spiritual care coming down the road. Because you see, the human psyche is organized into both spiritual and emotional understanding of the world. Even if we do not hold to a particular faith practice, we are self-aware. And there's the process, the cognition, they even give college degrees in that, but there's also the questioning, why am I here? Why did this happen? What is the meaning behind? And so we are actually organized rather dichotomously. And these two things, as I've said, are closely related and often intertwined. Both aspects need to work together while understanding the limitations of each modality and respecting each other. Emotional and spiritual care is necessary in all stages of the disaster cycle. In blue skies, the two practices each occupy their own space for the most part. However, that's just the preparation phase. That is when everything is going the way that you want it to go, maybe, right? When the bang happens, all right, the two modalities have to work together. Transferring the lead in a case back and forth depending upon the needs of the survivor. This will take us through the response, the recovery, and allow us to start into mitigation practices, at which point we can then disconnect the two care modalities and return into the preparation phase. Our efforts are very frequently seen as focusing entirely on the survivor. And that would be an incorrect understanding of emotional and spiritual well-being. And something I'd like to point out here is when you hear me speak of it, I say emotional and spiritual well-being. Most of the time when you see it printed, it is written out as spiritual and emotional. But spiritual could be a scary word for people. And so I lead with emotional because the current generation, they put their emotional situations out to the world. And it not only is it okay to put emotional first, it's kind of cool to do so. At least that's what my daughter tells me. All right. Anyway, our efforts might be seen as focusing on survivors, but the team, the emotional and spiritual care team, is not only available, but should be responsible for responders, volunteers, and recovery workers to help combat fatigue and burnout in the aftermath of the bang. And we've heard just a little bit about some of the efforts, but I will say that my interest in emotional and spiritual well-being came about as the result, once again, of the campfire and the incredible stress under which our DCMs found themselves. There was a church in Chico, I'm glad to say it was one of ours, St. John the Evangelist, who one day decided to put on a fair, a care fair, for the disaster case managers and other responders. And everything shut down for 12 hours while folks went and played in sand and painted and did that thing where you put the Elmer's glue on your hand and you peel it off and you're like, hey, look at the skin. You know. it was just a silly day, a day filled with fun. And that's part of what we're here to do, is to break that cycle, even within our own responders, our own recovery agents. The people, we care for the people who care, which in turn makes it so that you will see us turn over a lot faster than other people, because one of my jobs is to make sure that my people don't get worn out or burned out going forward. And I think that's about all I've got for you today. There's a ton of information on that sheet that can help you out. There's some good guidelines that you can Google and find them out. I will say Lighting the Way, absolutely top-notch publication, worth it for anybody who's ever interested in any kind of recovery when it comes to the brain, to the heart, to the soul. And it doesn't look like we're in paneling, so I'm going back over there.
All right, thank you. And so our last presenter for long-term recovery is going to be Kevin Cox with Hope Crisis Response Network. And if his chair will let him escape, he's going to come up here. You do not need a clicker, right? Once we get going.
Right there.
Well, I at least give it off of Mark here.
Oh, I have my own slide. I've been doing this all week and I didn't know how to slide. You'll be glad to know what I did is I knew you were going to be tired of reading slides all day. So I have a pictorial and it is timed so that when it stops, I stop. All right? So basically what you're going to see from me is you're going to see how a house is started, how we start from the beginning of a disaster and move all the way through the final and the rebuild. We're very fortunate to do that. So let's start now. Is it going to go? All right, we're good. So let me tell you a little bit while you're watching that slide. Hope Crisis Response Network, we go into an area to help our long-term recovery organizations rebuild homes for families that aren't able to do so on their own. We are one of two licensed contractors in the state that have a full-time disaster mission, ourselves and Mennonite Disaster Service. There's another organization in the area called Tiny Pines, and they focus on smaller housing. Very wonderful organization. We love them quite a bit. And then we have the Habitat for Humanities. They have a regular mission, first-time homeowner, but they go ahead and pop up in the midst of disasters as well, and we love working with them. When we go into a community, the first thing we do is after we have set up all of our processes with the long-term recovery, we go in with, talk to the building department, find out what the local guidelines are, what's the codes. You'll find in California that there are no two counties that are the same. So every time we go into a community to rebuild, we have to start from scratch all over again with our blueprints and get the snow loads. We have to get what the strapping, everything can be a little bit different. Back in the day, let's say Katrina, I would walk into the building department with one piece of paper showing the size of the house, and I would walk out with the permit same day. Nowadays, our blueprints are probably about 10 pages, very detailed, and then it also takes several weeks before we get a permit. So therefore, it holds up the builds. It's a little challenging for us from time to time, but also understand that we work very closely with the long-term recovery. In fact, we consider the long-term recovery committee our boss. We don't build for the homeowner. We build for the long-term recovery group. The long-term recovery group is one that funds the project. They pay for the materials. We just provide the free labor that goes along with that. I want to say that we also do not build a home until it is fully vetted by our case managers. Our case managers are the unsung heroes of the disaster world. It starts with the case management, it finishes with the case managers, and they're the ones that walk the client all the way through. And so I'm so any chance I get to give kudos to our case managers, I really love them so much and the work that they do, and they do a fine job in doing so. We have just completed over 200 homes since 2017 in California. It's not enough. we have many communities that we are not able to come into and build. At one time, we had 5 different rebuild projects going in California for disaster response. We've done, since 2015, 83 disasters in California. But you know what? We're just a little old organization based out of Indiana. We came back in 2015 to help with the rebuilds, and we ended up staying because it just was fire after fire after fire after fire. And so we found that California was short on resources, so we stayed. My wife informed me just recently that our deployment's coming to an end for she and I, and we're going to be heading back to Indiana. And our California office will remain open, and we will continue to serve California. We love it here. It's a wonderful community. But in these rebuilds, we bring volunteers from all over North America to serve 1 week at a time as we build these houses. There's so much more that I could tell you, but I was asked to share a few of the stories that I shared the other day when we were short on time. I want to piggyback on Mark with the, and he's got big shoulders. I could piggyback on him pretty easy. I'm going to give you a little bit of shock and awe. Today we've had a lot of fluffiness. We've had a lot of positive build-up, and that's the way it should be. But it's not easy in the work that we do. I want to show you another side of disaster response that you don't think about on a regular basis. It's things that we in the field deal with on a regular basis. Many years ago in Jackson, Tennessee, we did a disaster in that area. Big tornado, 2.5 miles wide. A lot of destruction. Mom holding her son. They were told to go into the bathroom because it was safe if you didn't have a basement. And tornado hit the house, and the child was sucked out of her arms. The next door neighbor, they found mom and dad at the bottom of a tree, and at the tree itself, they found their newborn impaled into the tree. You see, these are the type of things that the families that we are blessed to serve, and we are required. We get to build the house, but we're as a faith-based organization, we're commanded to help restore the lives. We touch many in the community, not because they themselves lost their homes, but because they lost community members. And in doing so, it is so important that our volunteers take the time to love unconditionally. We do not judge in any way of the homes that or those that we build for. It's purely a joy, and we don't put a mortgage on any of our homes. These are strictly a gift. There are sometimes Cal Home will which I love the Cal Home. They have their mortgage situations, but we are an organization that just likes to respond in love. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional thinking about some of these families today. Some of the other things that we've had to experience and endure as another family where they went again into a bathroom because were told this is where it was safe, and mom's holding on to her son, 5 years old, and Dalen got sucked out of the roof. Grandma and Grandpa got sucked out. They didn't find Dalen's body for, I think it was just 2 weeks. Grandma and Grandpa, they found within a matter of a couple of days. But all these stories have a happy ending. Not so much in the sense of the fact that they've lost so much, but they found a way to recover, and to recover in a way that meant something to them. All 3 of those families went on to create non-for-profit organizations that deal with grief and loss in their community. And it's been so wonderful to watch them grow. The one gal that lost her son Dalen, that got sucked through the roof, and Grandma and Grandpa, her daughter came to me and she said, "When you build my house, will you build a basement so I don't have to go into the bathroom anymore?" And so we did. And they've grown up to be such, I get to watch them grow, and it's such a joy. But the other thing that we have found is that because that false sense of security, we now have tightened up our bathrooms to become a safe room for homes that cannot be used. We paved the way for home hardening in this area. We've reduced the burn time of a home by almost 20 minutes now, whereas before the impact where a lot of redwood was used and things of that nature in the old days, and those homes would just go up like crazy. We have found a new way to build. It's a very polished way to build as well, and we don't take that lightly. Every family that we get to serve, we are so blessed to be able to do so, but we also make sure that we build a good, solid, quality home along the way, as you're seeing within the pictures and the building that is going on behind us. Not only do we bring volunteers in, but we also work with AmeriCorps. And we've been a sponsor for AmeriCorps going back almost 21 years now. And we're very blessed to be able to work with them. We have a lot of characters that come into camp. It is those characters that have helped pave the way for these families to go on to do amazing work in their communities with this grief counseling, because they come in with their sense of humor, but more importantly, they come in with a listening ear. They don't come in and try to tell them what to do. They don't, oh, you got to go do this, you got to go do that. They will sit and listen and drink iced tea till the sun comes down. I mean, they love being able to have the opportunity to create those relationships with the families that they serve. I'm going to end with this one story because our slides are getting really short here, and I promised you I'd stop. We had a home in southern Indiana, and in this scenario, this woman, we were very fortunate to be able to build for her, but she didn't like us very much. She didn't like, as a faith-based organization, she didn't like churches. She didn't like, there's a lot of things she didn't like. She didn't like her current house, and she was always worried that the roof was going to blow off when the storms came in. And we do something called family night. So every Thursday night, we invite the families that we serve to have dinner with our volunteers, and it creates relationships. So we kept inviting her as her house was being built, and she finally showed up one Thursday night, had dinner, and she had the best time. And through that course of time, not only did she get to like us, she began to love us. And that's what we do when we're building these relationships. Now, keep in mind, when we build a house, every time that a volunteer group comes in, they put their autographs on 2x4s, 2x6s, up in the rafters, or the trusses, as you may call them, and notes of encouragement. One Thursday night, she came to me and she said, "Can I speak tonight?" Because we always had a time for families to share. And she said, she got up and she told everybody about what life was like before she met us and the teams that served her. And she said, I lived in a home that was, every time it rained and the winds picked up, I always felt like the roof was popping up, and then I was going to lose my roof. And then the tornado hit. And she said, you know, I would lay in my bed and I would just sob because I was so afraid of the storm coming down and pelting on that. Have you ever been inside like a mobile home with an aluminum roof on it, and you can hear how heavy the rains are? And it would frighten her and her children. We ended up building her a beautiful home. And she said to the group, she said, you know, I used to lay in bed, it's the story that I just gave you, and she says, I am no longer afraid because I have 200 angels up in my roof. And that's the way that she looked at it with us, is that all of those volunteers that came to serve her autographed her trusses, and she has such fond memories of them. And we are so blessed to be able to get to do what we do. You know, the other component in what we get to do, and Bruce Yerman told me this morning. Bruce, there he is. Bruce is still here. He said, you know what, Kevin, every single home that you built for us in Paradise, you guys came under budget. That is the way that it's been in every rebuild that we have done for the last 25 years. We always come in under budget. We under-promise and over-deliver. I know that's my time, so I'm going to let you go with that, but This has been an amazing conference for me personally to watch, because the 3 different days that we had, what was so nice about it is to see the different organizations, the different governmental bodies that came, the different case managers. We had the Suchi on Monday. We had a wonderful time with them. We had the Sacramento Salvation Army on Wednesday, a wonderful time with them. And today we were with North Valley Community Social Services, had a wonderful time with them. And so we want to just thank all of you for your attendance. We have just a couple closing things here. I hope that you took to heart as much as what our speakers shared with you today. I always tell everybody that if you can walk away with at least 3 things, and I counted probably 40, 50 different things that I thought were really cool, that the new things that I got to hear, and you can't. Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing is that this doesn't stop here. You have a wonderful VOAD here in Tehima, Shasta. You've got Tammy Ray, you've got Theresa, that are constantly. Matt is always around when you need him. You've got Ryan, you got Rob. Rob's here. You got a team, and now you're just building that team, and you're no longer building that ship as it's floating out of the harbor. You're building the ship before it leaves, and I love that so very much. You're a very near and dear community to us. We built here for the car fire. We built many homes, and we were thankful to do that. So continue to work together. Remember, as they said, together we are stronger. We want to thank all of you for coming. We want to thank our sponsors, Cal OES, Listos, and the United Way. We want to thank our host, NVCSS, for allowing us to be here. We are going to have, for those of you that signed up to do dinner, and maybe you didn't, we are going to do a dinner together, a networking time. And before we do, it's all Go Box stuff.
They're also to-go boxes.
I'm sorry?
If you want to take your meal.
Oh, you can take your meal in a Go Box if you want to. That's fine too. Before I turn it over to Amy, I want to acknowledge Adriana one more time. Adriana just did such an amazing job putting on this conference. All of our executive board. Special thank you to our speaker, Aaron Titus, who came out from Colorado. We're so thankful. Our government partners, our VOAD partners, thank you all so much. And that's enough for me for tonight. I'm grateful that you're here, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy.